And the other thing is, and I just want to paraphrase a sometimes hackneyed quote by Nelson Mandela, which was, if you speak to a language in speaking the language that a woman understands, you will speak to her mind. If you speak to her in her language, you will speak to her heart.
SAR Experience.
Привіт з Lvova. So welcome back to another episode of the Valka Valkas with me, Connor Klein, and I'm speaking to you from the beautiful, beautiful city of Lviv in western Ukraine. I'm just here in the park in front of the university, Ivano-Franko. And in today's video, we're going to be getting into my experience here learning Ukrainian over the last 2 weeks, and importantly, because I know that's why you watch this channel, did that help me with interacting and meeting local girls here in Lviv, or was it completely just an intellectual exercise for me and didn't add any value from that point of view? Of course, there are other reasons to learn Ukrainian. This is not the only one. I mean, there's a lot of practical reasons, like I am here in western Ukraine, where Ukrainian is the main language spoken in everyday life. So obviously that means I can, read stuff that's all around me. I can order in the cafe and all those things. Anyways, I started off this is actually my third time coming here to Lviv to study Ukrainian for a short period of time. So my level is a high beginner. I've had some previous experience. I also speak Russian, and they are mutually intelligible to a certain extent. About 44% in terms of vocabulary is mutually intelligible, and the grammar is actually really similar, so that helps a lot knowing Russian. But at the same time, I am still at a beginner level, so that's going to be relevant to you, because obviously very few people who visit Ukraine speak Ukrainian at all, and the few foreigners who travel here who learn a local language, in inverted commas, I know that's a bit controversial to say that Russian is local as well. In some cities like Odessa, even in the capital of Kiev, you're still going to hear more Russian than Ukrainian, but here it's very different. People speak Ukrainian everyday life, and so on a practical level, that helps a lot, just learning the language, and interacting with everybody. But for the purpose of focusing in on this video and making it more relevant to your interests, it's like, how did this help with girls? And the reason that I'm answering this question is simply because it's one that's asked a lot on my channel in the comments, either to do with the Russian language or the Ukrainian language. Should you learn it? Does it help? Are there any benefits to learning it? Is it a good idea? Because learning a language is a big investment of time. It's not really a big investment of money in general, but definitely in terms of time, it's a big investment. And not everybody is like me. If you knew my channel from a few years ago when I first started blogging, it was actually about how to learn languages, because languages are one of my big passions in life. So I've learned over 10 of them and counting. So adding in Ukrainian, along with having learned a little bit of Belarusian last year, is just something I love. And of course, I speak Russian to I would say, high intermediate level at this stage, which, if you want to know more about my experience with Russian and how that has helped me just in general with traveling in this region, and also with girls, and whether it helped me meet more girls, more beautiful girls, I'm going to link all that up in a card. It's probably going to be in this side because it reverses it when I look at it, but and also down in the description I'm going to link that up. But for today's video, we're going to focus in on Ukrainian and whether that helps or not with respect to your relationships if you're going to come here to Ukraine. So let me set the scene a little bit. I'm in Lviv, which is a really beautiful city, and I've actually been staying in this Upper Passage hotel, which is really amazing, with a beautiful view of the city. It's an old historic city. It's really unique, I think, in Ukraine, and not just because of the architecture. I'm actually going to link that below, that beautiful view at the Upper Passage Apart Hotel, because I think it's really fantastic, and you guys should know where you can also go and stay when you come here. So just go and check it out if you are planning to visit Lviv. It's a great place to stay, and I really enjoyed it there. So I just want to let you know about that. It's also a little bit unique because, ironically, although Ukrainian is the national language of Ukraine, and of course it's the most widely spoken overall in the country, this is the only big touristic city that actually Ukrainian is spoken in everyday life all over the city, and in the center, especially. In other cities, like I said, like in Odessa, in the Black Sea in the south, where I spent a lot of my summertime, Russian is the main language used in everyday life. even in the capital Kiev, still you're going to hear more Russian in general than Ukrainian. And just when you're doing those touristic things or travel things, you know, like going to restaurants, bars, clubs, people are still going to speak to you probably first in Russian before Ukrainian. And then Kharkiv, the big city, Ukraine's second city in the east of the country, Russian is also the most widely spoken language there. So this makes it kind of unique to be here in Lviv and hear Ukrainian just like really predominantly every day and everywhere. Now, if you do visit and you come just for a short space of time and you're in the city center, you can do all those things in other languages like English. You're not going to have any problems ordering or something like that. It's not extreme here to that extent. The level of English is not very high in this region in general. This is in Europe the part of the continent has the least competent English language skills. It's going to be lower than you're going to find in Central Europe, but on say the main square or in your hotel or, you know, at the airport, you're going to find people who can speak to you in English, probably Polish, everybody, and also Russian. So those three languages, in addition to Ukrainian, are very widely spoken in the center. But overall, the level of English in Ukraine is pretty low, and even in the west where it's a bit higher than you're going to find in other parts of the country. I think part of that is just because we're closer to the Polish border. We're very close to the Polish border, so that's why Polish is spoken. And then just because we're closer to the rest of Europe and they have a lot of foreigners come here because it's such a beautiful place, the level of English seems to be higher amongst the younger people especially. And that's a big change from say 10 years ago when I first came to Lviv. I came in 2009 for the first time. And it was really hard to speak in anything other than Ukrainian and Russian because the level of English was close to non-existent at the time. I remember the city really struggling, but that's actually one of the reasons why I was so determined to learn Russian after that first trip. And if you want to find out more what happened that first trip, there was a lot of crazy things. Some rather unfortunate, and I've told in previous episodes of the podcast, and I'll just link those also up in cards and below in description so you can watch them and learn from them. Cool. So in the middle of this podcast, this gentleman came up to me. What's your name?
Michael.
Michael, and you're from which country?
From England.
He's English, and he's actually been in here learning Ukrainian because he's considering moving here and spending a lot of his time, maybe part of the year. Is that kind of your plan?
That's pretty good, yeah. That's right.
And just off camera, we were talking about like some of the difficulties had actually with learning language. So how would you describe your experience with Ukrainian, and have you, you know, in terms of difficulty, how much time you've invested, and you know, is there much reward for you? What do you think?
I think, first of all, I would say it is a difficult language. It's fundamentally different from the languages that we would have in the West, including English. And you have to be prepared to make the effort here. Outside of the main tourist facilities like restaurants and those kind of things, it is difficult to find a person who does speak fluent English all of the time. And so with my limited Ukrainian, which I've been trying to improve every day, by practicing it, I end up speaking a form of Surzhyk, if I could call it.
Surzhyk, which is, if you don't know, is a mixture of Ukrainian and Russian normally together. So you speak some Russian from before?
No, but I put it to Angliski, Ukrainska, Surzhyk.
Surzhyk, okay.
Yeah.
It's a новый Surzhyk у нас.
A unique type of Surzhyk. It's kind of a combination of English and Ukrainian. And I can get by in restaurants and cafes and the like. But it's a challenge, it's true, but it's worthwhile. Yeah. For me, I think to move here, fundamentally you have to have some knowledge of the language because the cultural difference is so great you'll be isolated and lost without it. Yeah. And this is definitely a culture where you are expected to be able to integrate into their way of thinking, their lifestyle, not the other way around.
Very interesting to hear this from someone else who's planning to move here. So the language is difficult, but already Michael is getting a really good return on his investment in terms of like being able to integrate more with local people.
Yes.
Are you single, Michael, or are you not single?
I am single.
Oh,
yes.
he's single. All right. So then the big question is, how has this helped with your relationships with local women in Lviv? Because that is this is exactly what this video is about. Right? Normally I just waffle on, but now we made it a lot more interesting by asking someone else how they've gotten on with this.
I would say on that part, I think the ability to have some language skills, it does open doors in terms of relationship potential. But my time here is principally to find my feet work-wise, and I know it's a cliche, I've been so busy over the last month to really concentrate on that sort of things. But I must say I do find the women here to be very beautiful. It's true.
All right, so we're getting a thumbs up for the women in Lviv. And learn some Ukrainian if you want to get more intimate. Well, I wouldn't say necessarily more intimate, but definitely, I'm putting words in his mouth a little bit, but
Say
definitely,
nothing.
say nothing, right. But definitely, yeah, if you want to increase the chance of having a good rapport, making a good impression, and actually be able to communicate over the long term more effectively, then of course learning Ukrainian is going to be very helpful.
Yes.
So that's good. So Michael's taking the plunge, he's investing his time into learning some Ukrainian, which is something obviously I endorse big time. That's one of the themes of my channel. Great, Michael, thanks very much for
Pleasure to meet you.
sharing your thoughts and your experience here in Lviv.
Thank you very much.
Cool, man, right?
Excellent. Cheers. Thanks.
Don't forget your bag. Do you wanna-
It's my life.
All right, I'm just keeping it rolling and whatever. So, all right, have a great day. So definitely when you begin learning a new language, you actually get your biggest boost right at the beginning, because you go from that 0 stage up to like a high beginner, and that just, transform things really from not being able to understand anything or partake in absolutely nil in Ukrainian, if it's the new language, to actually be able to do a lot of things. Now that, if you watch my episode about learning Russian, you're going to see that actually when you get past that beginner phase and you go to intermediate, it actually gets really tricky. It's not just, it's called the intermediate plateau, but I think with respect to interacting with girls, it actually takes a big dip because you're quite unsure of yourself, and it's hard to be affirmative when when you're going through that intermediate phase up to advanced, and then from that advanced stage it just skyrockets upwards. So that should give you good inspiration and motivation to actually learn the basics of the language. And I don't mean just ordering the rest, but actually getting up to this high beginner level where you can do basic conversations and be able to interact with people. It's going to be a bit tiring and it's going to be limited. You're not going to be extremely eloquent, but that's not the purpose of it. And getting that stage is a lot more work. So I always say it's good to just start with that and achieve that high beginner, and you'll get so much value out of it in terms of interacting with girls, no matter where you are. And as you saw from my little impromptu interview with Michael here, it definitely does help with the interaction. So let's get into the meat of today's topic. Did it actually help me in terms of meeting more girls, maybe hooking up with more girls, having relationships over the last 3 weeks, or was it just something that didn't add much value from that point of view? And definitely, of course, it adds value anyways in terms of learning language, especially for me, because I just get excited learning new languages. That's why I've learned more than 10 of them. And, obviously interacting with everybody in Lviv, it's just like cooler to do it in Ukrainian. But in terms of communication, let's start with communication number one. In the city center, as I said, most people will be able to speak to you in some other language, whether it's Russian or Ukrainian or Polish. And I speak English, obviously, is my first language, and then I speak intermediate Russian. So in terms of communication, especially because younger people, younger girls, speak better English than the older generation before them, in terms of actually communicating, I would say no, it didn't add very much, because I'm at that low beginner but that high beginner stage, and most girls here would probably have the same level of English, if not better than me, and if not, they would have it in Russian. So actually, in terms of just pure communication and communicating what we want to say, I would say that my experience of it did not add anything from that point of view. Now, you might think, well, that's the end of the video. Why did you watch it for the intro for the last 15 minutes if that's it? Well, that's not the only thing that we learn languages for, and actually just communication is just one element, and it's not the most important element at all when it comes down to it, because what's more important is emotion, and that is something that Learn Ukrainian has provided made a huge impact in terms of my experience here in Lviv. So how many guys do you think come here and actually learn Ukrainian? Now, there are some foreign students. They tend to be from maybe North Africa, maybe from Arabic countries, maybe some of them are from other parts of the former Soviet Union, and they do, of course, learn Ukrainian. If they're also India, I've got India. There are actually a lot of Indian students here as well, and as well as Nigerians, so and other parts of Africa. They do go and learn Ukrainian because they need it for their studies. So they are the only kind of foreigners that I've met that have been able to speak Ukrainian that I've met here in Ukraine. Foreigners who come to learn the language are normally people who maybe have some Ukrainian heritage, like their ancestors came from Ukraine. They may have grown up speaking even a little bit of Ukrainian at home and they want to come here and practice it. And you have some guys who maybe have girlfriends from here in Lviv, or they are looking for a wife here. You have the marriage agency crowd. No, they don't normally learn the language at all. But then some of them, they maybe meet their wife here and they go and learn the language. So biggest thing that learning some Ukrainian does is the novelty factor. And that's the fact that you're going to be pretty unique if you come to Lviv, and you can actually hold a beginning of our conversation at least in Ukrainian, because everyone else just uses English and they're all doing the same thing, basically 99% of them. And maybe some can speak Russian, and that makes them a little bit different. But as I said, people here, almost everybody uses Ukrainian at home. So the novelty factor is pretty big if you can actually just hold any sort of conversation in Ukrainian. You get big kudos from that, from everybody in the city, basically, because it's so unique. And definitely local girls in particular, they love this. Now, sometimes people did think that I was actually just a Russian speaker from somewhere else, like Belarus or maybe from Eastern Ukraine, and I didn't speak proper Ukrainian, so that can actually be a little bit of an unfortunate perception that I noticed, because then people a lot of times they would just switch to Russian with me, which was kind of funny because it's obviously not my first language. But I do use a lot of the Russian words just because I'm learning Ukrainian, and probably pronounce them quite like I'm trying to speak in Russian, even though my Russian pronunciation I know is not close to perfect or anything like that. But aside of that, you definitely get a huge boost in terms of that novelty and that wow factor if you speak in Ukrainian. And the other thing is, and I just want to paraphrase a sometimes hackneyed quote by Nelson Mandela, which was, he said this back in the apartheid era when he actually went and learned Afrikaans, which was the language spoken by the people who are basically oppressing him and taking away his civil rights. But he actually went and he learned Afrikaans, and he said that, if you speak to a language I'll paraphrase him, if you speak to a language in speaking the language that a woman understands, you will speak to her mind. If you speak to her in her language, you will speak to her heart. And I think that's just a really good way of summing it up, that we have a different emotional connection with speaking in our native tongue than we do when we're speaking with a language that we've learned as a foreign language. And especially if a foreign guy speaking a language is really, really rare, then that definitely touches their heart. And I've actually noticed this effect not just here in Lviv over the last few weeks, but actually with girlfriends that I have from other parts of Ukraine who speak Ukrainian at home, but we've always used Russian or maybe Russian and English together. And then I learned Ukrainian. They were like super, super emotional about it because they were able to speak to me in their native tongue. And they found this just like a wow effect, as I said. So definitely for that novelty, emotional connection, then learning Ukrainian definitely does make a difference than if you use English or maybe Russian when you're here. So I actually contrast a little bit with Belarus, where I learned some Belarusian over a few weeks, and I did actually practice it with girls I met in Minsk. But there they normally don't speak it as their native language, and as a result, they learned it as a school language, and then they have some foreign guys speak them in Belarusian. Nowhere near the same effect at all. And in fact, if you were to go around speaking Ukrainian in other cities in Ukraine where Russian is the main language, it probably won't have the same impact simply because it's not their native language, and it's a bit odd to be speaking in it. Even though this is Ukraine, especially as a foreigner, so it's not going to have the same impact at all. Now, definitely that emotional connection is great for building rapport. I'm not saying it's the only reason you should go and learn a language, but definitely it is going to have that effect, and building an emotional connection is vital, obviously, if you're trying to build that relationship with a girl here in the west of Ukraine in particular. So I just want to give you one more practical consideration, and that's if you're learning a language in general and you're at that beginner phase, and in particular here, because I've been learning Ukrainian, should you just only speak Ukrainian to people no matter how difficult it is? That would probably get you further along with learning the language, but I think in terms of building rapport and meeting girls and interacting with them and maybe having some sort of romantic connection with them, that it's probably not a good idea if the girl can actually speak some of those other languages like English or maybe it's Russian. So what I tend to do is actually begin everything in Ukrainian, and then if it gets too hard, I will switch between Russian, into some Russian and maybe some English, depending if, whether the girl speaks those languages or not. Obviously, she only were to speak Ukrainian, that would be it. And that's actually really, really tough. And in my experience, having to do everything Ukrainian, I've gone on dates where it's been 3 hours of only Ukrainian, and obviously at this beginner level, it's like really, really hard and stressful and exhausting. And also it's harder to be affirmative and to lead as a guy if you're doing a language where you're not very comfortable. Now, I just go with it anyways, no matter what my level is. I'm used to learning languages and sounding like a 5-year-old when I start off in all of them, so that doesn't really affect me so much, but that can be very hard for a lot of learners who are beginning, that they feel very insecure. That insecurity is going to be an issue if you're trying to build a rapport with a girl and take her out and go on a date, or maybe take her home and have an intimate relationship with her. So one interesting phenomenon I noticed, and I don't know why it is, but girls in this region seem to love German an awful lot. I don't know what it is. Maybe meine Brüder in Deutschland have left a very good impact on the region recently, not historically. And actually a lot of girls get excited speaking to me in German, because I actually used to live in Munich, so I do speak a certain level of German. It's not my first language, obviously, but I'm completely cool if some girl gets excited speaking German, in entertaining that, obviously, to build that kind of connection between us. And that's something to remember, which is a counter argument to learning languages in general more than English. And I've heard this from pickup artist who's well known online, who told me this in person, that he actually doesn't speak in Russian or in Ukrainian. He doesn't speak Ukrainian, but he speaks some Russian. And he said he doesn't use it because he's not able to basically dominate and lead the conversation with girls and be affirmative. And also the girls then try to qualify themselves because he's British, and try and impress him with their English. And he finds that works a lot more effectively with seducing girls than speaking in Russian. I think it really depends on the situation. I think being able to speak whether it happens to be, in this case, Ukrainian or Russian for this region, and having that quiver, that arrow in your quiver, is a huge addition to your arsenal in terms of being able to pull that out and actually, use the language when it's going to be effective for you. Now, of course, if you think the rapport and the relationship is going to develop more because the girl is super excited to speak in, maybe it happens to be English, in my case a lot of times it's actually been German, then go with that. I mean, the main focus should be building that connection, that relationship, and having, a romantic experience with a girl that you're really interested in here on your stay, during your stay in Lviv, and just insisting on speaking Ukrainian, or if it happens to be Russian or another language, it's not really should be your focus in terms of using the language to that effect. So definitely for me, even though I've heard the counter arguments, and definitely some girls just love the idea of, they get turned on by speaking maybe another language because it's kind of unique for them. Maybe that's English, maybe it's going to be German, which I see a lot, then definitely go for that. But if you can also then speak in Ukrainian here, it's going to make a big, big difference and make you unique, and you're going to build that emotional connection. That's been my experience with learning Ukrainian. That answers your question, I hope. I'll sum it up. Basically, that yes, you will meet more girls and build a deeper connection, have more romantic experiences, I believe, from my personal experience here, if you do learn Ukrainian, but it's not necessary to have a great time here. So, and you can use English with most girls, but it's just going to be probably a little bit more difficult. And learning languages takes a big investment of time, and it's something I personally enjoy, and it's been really rewarding for me in over the more than 10 languages that I've learned to a certain degree. So for someone like me, and I have a lot of confidence when I go to learn a new language, I don't care about not finding the words or sounding maybe not so eloquent or making mistakes with pronunciation, maybe with even saying things that are completely wrong and looking stupid. Don't care, because I know it's part of the process. I know I'm going to get there eventually. So for me, it's not a problem to invest that time. I revel in it, in fact. But if you're not someone who isn't willing to commit and really be motivated to put in the time to do it, then it's probably best just to stick to English. If you are willing to put in the time, conversely, and actually engage yourself, you will get a return on your investment. And that's it, basically. That's my experience with learning Ukrainian, my advice to you if someone tells you should learn Ukrainian, or if it's going to be Russian. Russian obviously you can then use in a lot more cities afterwards. It's the same thing though, because if you were going to spend all your time here in Lviv because you really love the city, like Michael who came across, like he's planning to live here, then definitely focus on Ukrainian. If you're planning to travel around the entire region, like maybe going to Belarus where I'm flying to tomorrow, you may have seen my winter nightlife vlog from Belarus, then definitely learn Russian first, and then afterwards learn Ukrainian, because you're going to be able to use that language in a lot more countries. So I really appreciate that not everybody is like your Irish boy here, the language czar who just really, I'm mad about learning languages, right? So if what you really need to focus on is a solution. And one of the solutions to the linguistic barrier that you will face if you come here to Ukraine is actually to invest in having a coach to take you around, not just with the language, but that is one of the things I really help my clients with. And that's one thing that they really point out if you look at the winter vlog as well. That was one that's cited. Is the fact that I can help bridge that language barrier, because I'm going to be there. I'm going to be able to, do the communication and point everything out to you, not just in the language, but obviously in the interaction in general. But language is one of those key components that can transform things when you go from not being able to communicate very effectively to suddenly having me there with you in person to be able to coach you and obviously interpret everything and build that rapport and that energy that you're going to need. So I've been working with more and more clients. It's actually getting a little bit overbearing how many people are interested, which is a great problem to have. So what you should do if you are interested, if you're thinking of coming here to Ukraine, or you maybe you've been talking online with a Ukrainian girl, or maybe from Belarus as well, write me a message on ConorKlein@czarexperience.com or DM me on Instagram. My handle is czarexperience, and you can apply. We'll chat a little bit, and I'll send you some questions for you to fill out. I'm also probably going to link a form below eventually where you can actually just automate that, and then you can send your application to me if I think we're a good fit to work together, because the Czar experience and living the Czar experience is amazing, but it's not for everybody. Like if you're not a person who enjoys leaving your comfort zone, coming to a country that's less traveled to, having the interaction in an environment where maybe English isn't so widely spoken in order to date and, beautiful, beautiful women here in Ukraine, and to have that kind of more adventurous experience in the real east of Europe, then, the Czar experience is just not for you. And but honestly, you wouldn't have got to the end of this video if that were the case, because I've been speaking probably at this stage for more than 20 minutes. So we're going to assume that you are interested, motivated, and really, really committed to coming here and having that experience. Then you should reach out to me, apply to become part, to live the Czar experience with me. It's going to be an amazing summer. I'm going to fly tomorrow to meet a client in Minsk in Belarus. After that, I'm going to come back to Ukraine to meet another client. We're actually going to travel around Ukraine and also Belarus. Got another one coming up in August. So definitely, if that's for you, which I really believe it is, if you got to the end of this video, then reach out to me and we can discuss it. We also been doing a lot of coaching just online, remotely, because I can't meet everybody in person. And if there are a lot of issues that I can help you with, in particular if you've been speaking to a girl in Ukraine over the internet and you're not sure about whether you can trust her or not, then definitely I can do that vetting for you and we can discuss it. If you have learned Ukrainian and if you've hung out here in Lviv, then let me know below in the comment section, not just me, but also the other viewers to this video. Let them know how you got on here and what you think about learning the Ukrainian language, whether you think it's going to be a good investment of your time or not, or just in general, maybe you've also learned Russian or another language in the region. Let us all know below in the comment section. I'm going to stop rambling because that's what I tend to do at the end of these Vodcast episodes, and I will see you in the very next video. Do побачення, which is goodbye in Ukrainian, and that was the whole purpose of having come here to Lviv over the last 2 weeks. Pa-pa.
Czar Experience.